Podcasters are, in fact, gay, with Luke Goodhart
and Sean Madrid coming to you live from our studio in downtown Tucson. It's Wednesday, March 29th, and it's 5 p.m., and here are the local headlines.
It looks as though old Sheriff Joe is feeling a bit embarrassed about his past remarks, which is how most of Arizona also feels. Arpaio, the renowned racist entrepreneur and pink underwear fetishist, is asking that the courts ban prosecutors from using his campaign speeches as evidence in his upcoming trial. The trial is set for April 25th, where Arpaio faces misdemeanor charges for disobeying a judge's order to stop his infamous immigration patrols, which continued for 17 months after the order. Not surprisingly, Arpaio made some verbal bloopers on the campaign trail that would incriminate him further as being racist, so it's equally unsurprising that he wouldn't want the court to hear it. His defense claims that other candidates would be encouraged not to make certain statements during their campaigns. God forbid we see an end to inflammatory racist speech on the campaign trail. It's given us so much already. For Arpaio to be convicted, prosecutors have to prove that the 84-year-old sheriff intended to violate the judge's order. If they can prove this, then Arpaio could spend 6 months in jail, hopefully outside in a tent with a non-working fan, just as he subjected his prisoners to. Arpaio admits to disobeying the judge's order, but claims he did so unintentionally. Apparently, he slipped and fell while in a coma, ordered a 12-person posse to target anyone with skin darker than his.
And you can thank Senator Jeff Flake for allowing internet providers to sell your personal information to the highest bidder. Flake sponsored a bill that repeals FCC rules that required internet providers such as Comcast, AT&T, and Verizon to get your permission before they could use or sell browsing history and other sensitive data. The bill passed the White House 215 to 205, with 15 Republicans joining all 190 Democrats voting against it. The FCC rule had not yet gone into effect, but it was established in Obama's last days in office. It was overturned under the Congressional Review Act, or CRA, which allows Congress to undo recently passed regulations and ban agencies from passing similar regulations in the future. Last week, Flake's bill passed the Senate 50-48 on another largely party-line vote. It will now move to the president's desk, where it's expected to be signed and smudged with spray tan. The House will vote, the House vote was supposed to supported by Arizona Republicans or representatives such as Republicans Andy Biggs, Trent Franks, Paul Gosar, and Martha McSally. Democratic reps Raul Grijalva, Ruben Gallego, Tom O'Halloran, and Kristen Sinema voted against the law. Republicans supported the measure because they said the legislation exempted companies such as Google and Facebook from collecting personal information and only focused on internet service providers. It's worth mentioning that Google and Facebook generally donate more often to Democratic candidates, while the service providers give theirs to Republicans, although they're known to play both sides of the field. Flake himself is a benefactor of that cable money, as he received $22,000 from major internet providers in his 2012 re-election campaign, with $10,000 alone coming from Verizon. Well, it looks like you got your investment back, Verizon. Now the telecom giant will be the only one to know how much you secretly watch the Vampire Diaries and that you once Googled, "Why won't that rash go away?"
Local environmentalists, scientists, and officials say that Trump's sexy, ravishing 40-foot wall would devastate wildlife along the border. Currently, border fencing covers about a third of the 2,000-mile border. Even with this amount, environmentalists say that it restricts animals' ability to find food, water, and mates. Animals known to roam the border areas, such as the gray wolf, ocelot, and jaguar, are already endangered. Aaron Flesch, a biologist at the University of Arizona, says that the wall could potentially destabilize entire networks of animal populations by cutting off movement. He and other scientists say that the Trump administration has made no money available to study environmental impacts of the wall, and only narrow studies have been undertaken so far. In addition, Congress granted the Department of Homeland Security the ability to skirt all environmental laws in order to construct the wall. Environmentalists say this sets up an inevitable fight between DHS and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, who had set aside large areas decades ago for conservation and wildlife refuge. According to a study from that agency, more than 100 endangered species may be impacted by the construction of the border wall, including the pygmy owl and the ocelot, who make their home along the border with Texas. The border area near the Rio Grande in Texas is considered one of the most biodiverse areas in North America and is home to one of the last remaining areas of sable palm forests, where the ocelot calls home. Normally, the Endangered Species Act would have prevented the wall from going so fast without further studies. But former DHS Chief Michael Chertoff eased regulations in 2008 after Congress gave him that power in 2005. Ironically, Chertoff now opposes Trump's plan for a border wall, as he thinks that money should instead be spent to secure the nation's coastlines and airports. The ocelot community agrees with Chertoff and will protest outside the White House once they figure out a way to get around that border fence.
Go ocelots. Federal money intended to help Arizona's poorest families is instead largely going to child safety programs, according to the report by the Daily Star. About 8 out of $460 million in temporary assistance for needy families, or TAMF, funding went to three main poverty-fighting objectives. TAMF is partly used to provide cash assistance to families, and generally what people mean when they use the term welfare. The main objectives of TAMF include help with childcare, job training, and direct cash assistance to families. And in comparison, about 49% went to the Department of Child Safety, or DCS, the agency that investigates child abuse cases and removes children if necessary. The rest of the funding went to state agencies, operating costs, and other programs dealing with domestic violence prevention and services for the elderly. While the state has wide latitude in how to use the funding, it appears that Arizona doesn't match the rest of the country. Other states use TAMF money on child abuse and neglect cases, but it's usually around 7% compared with Arizona's 49%. Arizona has one of the highest rates of children taken from their parents because of abuse allegation, with over 17,000 children in out-of-home care as of March 2017. A spokesman for Governor Doug Ducey said that the high need is why so much of the funding goes toward DCS. But a report by Arizona State's Morrison Institute claims that these policy decisions make it harder for families with children to enter the workforce because they lacked child care and money to survive. Arizona is also the toughest state to get cash assistance in the entire country. In 2015, 10 or few families in poverty out of 100 received cash assistance from TAMP, compared to 23 out of 100 nationwide, or 23%. From 2009 to 2014, the number of children living in poverty in Pima County rose from 22% to 27%, compared with 25% nationwide. This may have something to do with Arizona's decision 2 years ago to tighten the time limit when a family could get cash assistance from 2 years to 1 year. As of February, there are over 4,000 families and over 7,000 children on the waiting list to receive TAMF assistance. This is at the same time that the Pima County has reduced the amount of families who could receive assistance from 17,500 in 2009 to 6,300 in 2015. Child subsidies have also been cut from $15 million in 2009 to $2.7 million in 2006. But on the other hand, those corporate subsidies aren't going to pay themselves, and we need that Intel plant, so our president has something to brag about on Twitter.
The University of Arizona has partnered with a private manufacturing firm to create a more eco-friendly concrete. The partnership began when the CEO of Metaxas and Accrete approached the U of A at their tech launch event and pitched the idea. The concrete is to be made from the leftovers from mining and coal plants and will be used for basic construction purposes. The team asked for guidance from Professor Jinhong Zhang, who's been studying these types of materials for 5 years under a National Science Foundation grant. He spent 3 years studying fly ash, a waste product from coal-burning power plants. Fly ash used to be released into the air before the EPA required that power plants provide filtering devices in 2011. This was after physicians groups said that the ash's fine textures can be absorbed in the lungs and release dangerous toxins and heavy metals. Fly ash has become a major problem in China, where power plants are often located near villages and farms. With the new process, the U of A team is looking for a more sustainable use of fly ash. The current process is to make concrete made from a mix of limestone and sand water, which is the third largest source of pollution according to the EPA. In addition to sustainability, Professor Zhang says that their concrete is more than 3 times stronger than normal concrete. Currently, the Acrete team is pursuing a patent and are continuing to study how they can use the material in real-world applications. Upon hearing the news, Donald Trump announced that he has an idea. He then winked and pointed towards what he thought was the Mexican border, but it was actually a Chili's restaurant decorated for Cinco de Mayo.
And I wanted to take a moment to talk about the program you're watching right now. Here at 5 on 20, we are undertaking a new kind of citizen journalism. We are going to give you the news as we see it, and we want more people to speak up with us. We need writers, hosts, anchors, camera people, sound people, the whole gamut. Times require a new way of informing ourselves, so do it. Join us. Do it now. Email us at info@creativetucson.org to get involved. And if you think there's a story we're missing, a person we should interview, an upcoming event we should cover, or have any news tips for us, shoot us an email to info@creativetucson.org. We are here for you, and we want to cover all stories from all points of views, so don't be strangers. Now in national and international news.
The Trump administration is planning to ramp up military operations in Yemen. A Pentagon proposal calls for increased military assistance to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates in their fight against the Houthi tribe. Yemen has been engulfed in a civil war for 2 years when the opposition Houthis rebelled against the current government of Abdurrahman Mansur Hadi. Houthis are loyal to former President Ali Abdullah Saleh, who was forced to flee the country when he was overthrown. U.S. officials say that the military increase is to fight ISIS and al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, who control small areas of the country. However, the decision can also be seen as an act of aggression against Iran, who backs the Houthis. Defense Secretary James Mattis has proved himself to be an opponent of the Iranian regime. As a military general, Mattis urged military action against Iran in 2011 and has dubbed the country the biggest sponsor of global terrorism in the world. The White House and Pentagon are currently weighing a decision to provide the UAE with intelligence and air refueling in the country's efforts to stage an assault on Yemen's coastline. The UAE has shared intelligence with the U.S. in the past, particularly about al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. However, the U.S. has received criticism for aiding the UAE and Saudi Arabia because of the high amounts of civilian casualties in Yemen. U.S. officials say that new intelligence revealed that al-Qaeda has been progressing on a project to develop explosives that cannot be detected by airport screening technology. However, the officials refused to admit if this intelligence was the reason for the recent ban on electronic devices on some planes. Iran says they are looking forward to starting a new proxy war against the U.S., but they might be rusty after so many years. Both sides are happy that don't have to fight a war on their own soil and get to destroy someone else's country.
The Justice Department joined a lawsuit launched by a California whistleblower accusing an insurance giant of defrauding the Medicare system. United Health Group, one of the nation's largest health insurers, allegedly committed fraud in its Medicare Advantage health plans. The whistleblower, James Swobin, first accused the insurer in 2009. He says the United Healthcare gamed the Medicare system by making patients look sicker than they really were. If proved true, then this would be one of the largest fraud cases involving Medicare, with damages potentially topping $1 billion. Medicare Advantage is a private alternative to traditional Medicare that has enrolled more than 18 million elderly and disabled people. In these plans, the government agrees to pay more for sicker patients and costs taxpayers about $150 billion per year. By making it look like patients were sicker, United Healthcare would have been able to take in higher amounts of government funds. The case is one of at least half a dozen whistleblower lawsuits against the plans alleging overbilling and fraud. In the other cases, the Justice Department has refused to intervene, which makes it harder for the government to recover the lost funds. Patrick Burns, the Associate Director of Taxpayers Against Fraud, said the Justice Department's decision to join the case shows that the Trump administration is serious about fighting corruption in the Medicare system. He says that this is not one company that is engaged in bad business, but rather a whole lucrative industry based on fraud, which is pretty much describing the entire U.S. healthcare system.
Residents in Mosul, Iraq were told not to leave their houses by the U.S. military before airstrikes hit the city, killing 150 civilians, according to Amnesty International. The human rights group said in a report that the U.S.-led coalition in Iraq is not taking enough precautions to protect civilians in the battle against ISIS. The Pentagon has opened an investigation into the strikes, which occurred on March 17th. While coalition forces admitted responsibility for the bombings, they refused to confirm whether there were civilian casualties. Colonel J.T. Thomas said that the Pentagon would review over 700 video feeds of U.S. airstrikes in western Mosul and was putting a high priority on the investigation. Donatella Rovera of Amnesty said that Iraqi authorities repeatedly advised civilians to remain at home and should have known that the decision would result in so many deaths. She also said that indiscriminate attacks violate international law and could be considered war crimes. The Pentagon says that the report will be released around the same time that the president releases his full tax returns.
UK Prime Minister Theresa May signed a letter that formally began the Brexit process of the UK leaving the European Union. May signed the so-called Article 50 document of the Lisbon Treaty, which announces that the UK will leave the EU, and delivered it to the European Council President Donald Tusk on today. Theresa called the event a, quote, time for the country to come together. The signing follows the June Brexit vote, where a little over half of the country's voters approved the decision for the UK to leave the Union. Jeremy Corbyn, who leads the opposition Labour Party, said that they respected the voters' decision to leave EU, but would they would hold the government accountable in every way possible. He said that Britain is going to change, but the question is how. Article 50 gives both the UK and the EU 2 years to reach an agreement on how the exit will play out. This means that if the deadline is not extended, then the UK will leave on March 29, 2019. Negotiations will begin in May, where the UK wants to talk about the separation and trade at the same time. However, EU officials say that this is impossible, and the two issues need to be discussed separately. So clearly the negotiations are already off to a great start. Next week, officials will discuss who will be able to keep the children on the weekends and who gets the love seat.
A new report by the UN Refugee Agency shows where the world's refugees are located, and the results are surprising. The agency tracked the 16.5 million refugees globally, which is an increase of 5 million from 2013. More than 30% of these refugees came from Syria. The report states that refugee children are 5 times more likely to be out of school than non-refugees and are threatened by preventable diseases such as diarrhea, measles, and malaria. Also, in many cases, parents of refugee children are unable to find work in the countries where they end up. Nations that take in the most refugees included Lebanon, who took in more than double the next country, Jordan. Next on the list was South Sudan, Chad, Turkey, and Nauru, a small island off the coast of Australia where refugees are sent if they land in Australia. The report contradicts the accepted notion that most refugees are seeking out a life in the West. Rather, most refugees prefer to stay closer to their homes so they can return once the unrest is finished. Other countries on the list included African countries such as Burundi, Rwanda, Niger, Mauritania, and Cameroon. The report's authors said that refugees only travel to the West if they can't find basic necessities in the countries where they end up. This included Libya, where militias and the government try to get rid of refugees or subject them to kidnappings, causing the refugees to seek shelter to the north in Europe, specifically Italy. From there, refugees will travel to where they can either find work or food. In pure numbers, Turkey took in the most refugees with over 2.7 million, followed by Pakistan with over 1.5 million. Yet South Sudan, Lebanon, and Jordan took in more refugees as a percentage of their GDP. None of the European countries besides Sweden appeared on the list. Most of the refugees in Turkey come from Syria, while most in Pakistan come from neighboring Afghanistan. In Turkey's case, refugees have fled because President Erdogan said that he would grant citizenship from Iraqi and Syrian refugees if all necessary checks had been carried out. The report said that many refugees end up in poor countries in the Middle East and Africa that don't have resources to handle them. The UN agency called for more funding from Western countries to support these refugees who find themselves in impoverished countries. Currently, the U.S. provides $5.9 billion to aid refugees in Syria, including funding that goes to neighboring countries. However, the UN said this is not enough and asked for another $4.6 billion to aid Syrian refugees and their host nations, such as South Sudan and Chad. Instead, the Trump administration decided to use $3.6 billion for airstrikes in Syria and the extra billion to help Syria's neighbors build a big, beautiful wall.
Legislation was introduced that would make the White House release information about visitors to Mar-a-Lago, which was dubbed the Winter White House by a talking shriveled tangerine of some sort. The Mar-a-Lago Act was introduced by congressional Democrats and would create an online database of every person who visits the White House, the vice president's home, along with any place where Trump regularly conducts business, which would include Mar-a-Lago. Senators Sheldon Whitehouse, Jack Reed, Tom Udall, Tom Carper, and Mike Quigley sponsored the legislation. They say that Americans have the right to know who has access to the president. Senator Whitehouse said that Trump mingles with the ultra-rich at the Winter White House, which charges $200,000 for membership. Under Obama's presidency, the administration kept a voluntary database of visitors to the White House. So far, the Trump administration has not reacted publicly to the bill, but it's safe to say that Trump will enthusiastically support it.
This was Luke Goodhart
and Sean Madrid for 5 on 20 News.
Next up, Sophie Gibson-Rush tells us what's what with local music this week.
Hello Tucson, I'm Sophie and this is Strong Sound. Guess what happened this week? Karima Walker's album, Hands in Our Names, got a beautiful review on Pitchfork. I quote, "One of the record's best moments is the narco-drone folk of St. Ignacio. Walker starts by approximating the snowbound gloom of the cranky stable, but her dedication to emotional openness and wonderfully lightheaded vocal runs lends an unusual lushness to the proceedings. The track flowers as it goes into unexpected ways, and the feelings something like stumbling upon a jungle in the Arctic or a beach on the moon. Karima started making music over 5 years ago, and I always knew her as a woman with an unearthly beautiful voice. But it goes way beyond that. As one of Tucson's hardest working musicians and as a human with great vision that goes beyond just sound or songwriting, Karima has morphed into a composer and an innovator. She's an artist who puts in equal amounts of work into the details as she does into the big picture. Karima's on tour right now until the 28th of April, but be sure to congratulate her when she returns and support her so she can keep making the magical sounds you've never heard before by buying her album out on June 30th. Oh, more good news. After successfully crowdsourcing the funding for a full-length album, June West is in the recording studio working on just that. June is originally from Montana, but she has strong ties to the Sonoran Desert that come through in her delicate, hazy Western sound. Her music and her life intertwine and converse and inform one another. From her website, June is a musician, artist, and rambler, composing her own understanding of what it means to live a good life. There is intention behind her vision. She's also playing a show Sunday night at Congress hosted by WTFAF. WTFAF exists for women, trans, and femme creators to claim space within the patriarchal world of entertainment. This month, they're organizing a fundraiser for the Tucson Abortion Support Collective. Check them out every Sunday, shining light on different groups of creative women, oftentimes at Club Congress. What else? Let's see. Visual art and music are married in Lano Terezas. Formerly half of the band Mellow Bello, now going solo, Lano is an entirely self-taught creative musician. Her music is electronic and ethereal. It's transportive. Her performances often include a visual element, from projections to light installations. Lano is also the driving force behind last year's Chick Magnet Festival, which showcased art and music from Tucson's community of female artists. Lano seems to embody the philosophy where you don't see it, make it. She created a community of female artists where she saw none, and it gave rise to many other events of its kind. She's also one of the few musicians in Tucson making music that verges on performance art, with attention to visuals and stagecraft. Check this out. Last but not least, Caterwaul is back. After nearly a year in band hibernation, Brittany Catter's soulful vocals and Take No Prisoners live presence make her an unmissable frontwoman. She's backed by Laura Hurley on bass, Jeff Lounsbury on lead guitar, and Ben Schneider on drums. Catter took some time off from Caterwaul to tour Europe, playing bass with Marianne Dessard. But now she's back and she's ready to rumble. Their next show is at 191 Tool on April 24th, opening for Taco Cat with Fox Bodies. And while we're on the subject, Taco Cat is awesome. Check out the Seattle band for some feminist grunge. These women are innovators, way beyond music. Their influence is more important than the local music scene. It extends to the social fabric of this city. By supporting them and following their lead, every artist can help propel this arts community forward and up. Support local music, buy an album, go to a show, and bring a friend. For now, I'll leave you with the magnificent video from the track 15 Forever off Caterwaul's album of the same name. I'll see you later, Tucson.